So sometime back, I did a video on the worst coworker I ever had the fun of working with. And what I decided to do on the same lines is I've got a couple of video topics that I'm going to call the worst of. So I'm going to make this into a small mini series where I talk about some of the worsts that I have encountered in my working life. And so today we are going to talk about the worst manager that I ever had. In 2003, I started working for what would be the last company that I worked for in Phoenix. And when I interviewed there, I interviewed with this guy, and everything actually seemed to be fairly normal. No big red flags that said that this guy was going to be a little bit crazy. But after I started working there, after a fairly short period of time, things started to change. Now, the thing I want to point out here is one of the things that made this guy the worst manager I had was the sheer narcissism that oozed out of this guy's pores. Villains that twiddle their mustaches are very easy to spot. The manager that's angry all the time, the guy who's yelling and screaming like this guy's boss was, they're kind of easy to spot. And for me, they're fairly easy to handle. But this very subtle narcissist, the guy that is very soft-spoken, handles everything in a very calm manner, but still wants their way, come hell or high water, those are some of the ones that are the hardest to deal with. And so in this video, I'm going to go over some of the things that happened with this guy that drove most of us crazy and earned him the title of worst manager I've ever had. Now, I'm not going to drop too many names in this video. I will from time to time because these people are fairly innocent. But I nicknamed this particular guy Mr. Policies, Metrics, and Procedures. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call him Mr. Policies from this point on. Now, the reason I called him Mr. Policies, Metrics, and Procedures was because he was good at writing policies, he loved collecting metrics, and he always wanted you to be writing SOPs, standard operating procedures. But past that, that was about all the guy could do in IT. He couldn't pull a cable, he couldn't fix a PC, he couldn't write a line of code. None of the normal IT functions that you would normally have at a company. The guy was pure management. That's all he was. Okay, so one of the first incidents, and I'm going to group these incidents into what I like to call nitpicking. These are just little things that this guy would do to try to get his way. And like I said, a narcissist is also a bully. When they want to get their way, they want to get their way. And these are some of the little things that he would do. These escalated over time, but these are the small things he would do. When I first started working there, the company was in the process of moving their IT from Pennsylvania to Arizona. Later on, what they would do is, this was in preparation of closing the office in Pennsylvania completely. But when I first started there, the goal was to move all of IT. So we did relocate some people from Pennsylvania to Arizona. Only a couple of these I even agreed with. I think they should have left most of them behind, but that's neither here nor there for this discussion. But one of the things that Mr. Policies really wanted to start doing is having more of these company dinners type things. Now, when I started my working life, I said a long time ago, I'm not doing any of this stuff. I'm not going to company dinners. I'm not going to company Christmas parties. I don't do social functions outside of work. The reason that I'm like that is because I like being at home. I am a homebody. And I figure that I already spend enough time at work. I spend enough time with people that I work with who may not be people that I even like, but I do work with them. So when my workday's done, I want to go home. Well, this irritated Mr. Policies to no end. And he was always harping on me about how I was hurting my career and on and on and on. Oh, these company dinners are very important, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I ain't going to them. And I never went to one. And to this day, I have not been to a company function, a company dinner, a Christmas party, a picnic, any of it. I go to work and I go home. So that was one of the things that drove him crazy. The other thing was, and none of this is really in chronological order, this is just things that I'm pulling from my memory, because this is, approximately 20 years ago. So we, when I first started there, we moved into an interior building, or an interior room inside our middle building. We had a 3-building campus. And we were on the bottom floor, and we had a large interior room that we converted into what he called the Network Operations Center. He had to give a fancy title to everything. Just like the computer room. Most of us called it the computer room. He would always insist that you called it the data center. It had to be the data center. Like that really mattered. But in this interior room, we had some custom lighting installed. This didn't happen immediately. This happened quite a bit later. But we had the same lighting that our design center had, which was the light fixtures hung from the ceiling, but they pointed upward. So the light was not just blasting down from the ceiling. It would actually point up at the ceiling and illuminate the room rather gently. We had 2 controls, one for each side of the room. Help desk was on one side, computer operations, myself, was on the other side, and we had a dimmer switch so we could adjust the lighting. One day I came in, I sat down and was working, and about a half an hour later, Mr. Policies comes up, and he looks at me, and he turns the dimmer switch up, so he brightens up that side of the room. And he comes over to my cubicle, and he says, "Well, I want you to know, it's not all about you." And I said, "What are you talking about?" "Well, the room lighting." I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about. This is the way it was when I got here." Now, fortunately for me, I had a lady who sat behind me who I turned my head and I asked her, I said, "Did you adjust the lights when you got here this morning?" She said, "No. That was the way that third shift left it when they left." And the next thing she said really deflated his bubble. But she said, "I actually kind of liked it the way it was before." So he just gives me this look. I'm like, "Yep, turn the lights back down there, buddy." So yeah, he had to walk away defeated from that one. But you see the type of things that he would get on you about, the things that had really no importance whatsoever. The next thing he tried to get on me about one time was my degree. I don't have a bachelor's degree. I have an associate's degree. When I went into college, I wanted to get in college, out of college as fast as I possibly could because I wanted to go to work. I wanted money. So my primary focus was to get a degree, get out of there, and get to work, which I did. But it always seemed to bother him that I was not at a bachelor's degree level. And I remember the conversation he was talking to me about sort of moving up the ladder, which I really don't focus on that much. I focus on the technology more than I do this career building and ladder climbing stuff that some people do. He's like, "Well, you don't really have a bachelor's degree, so..." And I'm like, "Well, are you wanting me to get a bachelor's degree?" He's like, "Well, And I'm like, "Okay, well, here's the deal. Are you going to pay for it?" And he just gives me this blank stare. I'm like, "Because I'm sure not going to pay for it." "Well, we do have tuition assistance." I said, "Yeah, your tuition assistance is a drop in the proverbial ocean. So if you want me to go out and get a bachelor's degree, you are going to have to pay for it. I am not paying for it." And I said, "I also want you to consider the fact that that may come back to haunt you, because what if I get a bachelor's degree and suddenly I'm more marketable and I can get out of here and make a lot more money? Did you consider that aspect of it?" Yeah, I didn't really get much of an answer to that question. So he kind of let that one go. The next little nitpicking thing that I kind of found amusing was I was in his office. I don't remember the context of it. And he's like, well, we really kind of expect our engineers here to be working, right around 45 hours a week. Now, I'm a salaried employee. So if I work 40 hours a week or I work 80 hours a week, I get the same paycheck. So I told him, I said, I don't think you're considering one aspect of this. And he's like, well, what's that? And I said, I work 45 hours a week. He said, what do you mean? I said, I don't take a lunch, which was true. From the time I left college and started working out in the working world, I never took a lunchtime. I never ate lunch. So it's like, what's the point of taking a lunchtime? I just work through the hour. And he was like, oh, well, blah, 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 blah. Of course, he starts trying to backpedal now, but I'm like, oh, too late, pal. So after that, I started taking lunchtime. I would go out and walk for an hour. I'd grab a coworker of mine, a friend of mine. We'd go out and walk for an hour, sit outside, talk, drink coffee. Sometimes we would actually go to lunch. So instead of getting what he wanted, which was me working 45 hours a week or more, he actually got 40 hours a week from that point forward. So for the rest of the time that he was there, I only worked 40 hours a week. And besides that little nitpicking incident, there's quite a few more, but if I were to talk about everything this guy did, this video would be 2.5 hours long. So I don't want to go down that road. But this was one of those things where he would pick those little things, And he did this to many other coworkers, not just me. These are just the incidents that, went on with me. However, I noticed as time went on that he sort of started to drop some of these things. And what I think happened is, I think HR actually told him to let off. Because our dress code wasn't the strictest dress code in the world. We had a very simple one, which is you're supposed to wear business casual. So, the polo shirts, the button-down shirts, and a standard pair of dress pants, black, dark blue, the type of thing. But you're not supposed to wear like jeans and a t-shirt. Well, and Mr. Policies was a by-the-book individual. Every punctuation mark, every letter. So I was a little surprised when our help desk staff, who sat on the other side of the room from me, they actually started wearing jeans once in a while. Now, if I remember right, they did have like a casual Friday type thing, but I never paid any attention. I just wore the same, style clothes every day. But I noticed our help desk techs were coming in jeans, and I'm like, Then it got to the point where that's all they were wearing were jeans. So finally, one day when I was in this guy's office, I'm like, I got a question for you. What's with all the jeans? And he looked at me, he said, they do a lot of work under desks and things like that. He said, I'm just not going to make an issue out of it, I'm just not going to make an issue out of it. And I'm like, yeah, I know what happened. I think HR told him to lighten up and to stop reporting so much useless crap. And so help desk staff figured that they could get away with it. Now, when it came to the policies that he wrote, you were expected to follow those to the letter. There was no exception. He was completely and totally inflexible about any of that. But the company-wide policies he started to be a little bit more flexible with, simply because I think HR and the company told him to lighten up a tad. Okay. The next thing about this guy that drove me insane, besides the little nitpicking items, was what we like to call pyramid building. If you're not familiar with the term pyramid building, it's when you have a manager who is doing things in the department like policies, procedures. Sometimes it's actually um, physical things where they're building a pyramid. Now, what a pyramid is, it looks nice, but it's completely and totally useless. You know, pyramids were tombs in Egypt, and apart from looking that great, they don't serve that much of a purpose. So when a manager goes off and does that type of thing inside of a company, we generally call it pyramid building. And there were two big incidents where Mr. Policies here came up with a couple of pyramids that he was going to build, and both of them sort of backfired on him in hilarious ways. First one was the computer room access, or like I said, he wanted you to call it the data center. I don't know why it had to be the data center, but so in most places, in order to get access to the computer room, you have to key entry, or you have to do a badge, or you have to have, you know, fingerprint scan, that type of thing. Something where not anyone can just walk into the computer room. And this is normal at every place I've ever been. However, Mr. Policies put a clipboard and a log sheet right by the one entry door. So every time that you went in the computer room, you had to log the time that you went in, log who you were, what you were doing in there, and then also he wanted you to, before you left the room, you had to write the time that you left. I remember being in the meeting where he instituted this, and we're all kind of looking at each other like, okay, why are we doing this? And one person actually brought that up, like, okay, what's the purpose of this? Now, this is a very clear indication when you're dealing with a pyramid, when you get an answer back of, well, this is the way I want it done. That's when you know that there's no company purpose to it at all. It's not a security thing. It's not a company thing. It's, I am building a pyramid. I am going to build this pyramid come hell or high water. Well, enough people complained to his boss that he had to institute a bit of a compromise. In other words, what we did was we put a badge reader inside the room. So now you had to badge to get in the computer room, and when you were done, you were supposed to swipe your badge when you left the room. Now, of course, the door cannot be locked from the inside because you have to be able to get out of there in case of a fire. So it's, you know, you could just open the door and walk out, but he was monitoring this. If he saw a badge into the computer room and no badge out of the computer room, you had several weeks before he was going to knock on your door because he got the report every month. So for some odd reason, he was monitoring this, although I'm pretty sure he was very upset losing the ability to find out why you were in the computer room. Well, the odd thing is, or the funny thing about it is, this came back to bite him right in the butt. So I had two colleagues that were in the computer room. So both of them badged to get in the room. They're working in the room. And then one of my colleagues had to leave. So he goes up to the door. He swipes his badge on the card reader. So the card reader beeps. The door clicks. However, my other colleague called him back. So the door never opens. No one ever walks out the door. He's in there for about 10 more minutes and then goes to leave. He badges on the card reader and then just opens the door. So it kind of became habit for us to just badge and leave. We didn't want to argue about it anymore. However, this was at a point in time of the year where we were being audited by our external auditors. And just as my colleague did his first badge swipe to get out of the room, the auditor, who happened to be one of the dumbest auditors I've ever encountered in my life, he was walking down the hallway on the outside of the computer room, and just as that card reader beeped, he was walking right next to it. So the card reader beeps, the door clicks, Nobody walks out the door. So he's thinking, well, my God, my badge just unlocked the computer room. So my boss had to spend the next 2 weeks proving to that guy that it was not his badge that opened the computer room. And I saw him a couple of times. The guy would just randomly test his badge on the door. He drove Mr. Policies up the wall. I loved it. I thought, this is great. This is exactly the type of thing that you deserve, for doing these ridiculous, silly things to us. So that was pretty funny. The second pyramid that this guy built was actually physical. So where I sat in the room, I was on the one side, I guess you could say the left-hand side of the room, and my cubicle actually faced a blank wall. Now, all of our cubicles in that area, we had glass. The upper parts of them were glass partitions so we could see. So Mr. Policies gets the idea that we should put 8 plasma displays, because you couldn't get giant LCD displays at this time, or they were really, really expensive. I can't remember which was the case, but plasma displays were much cheaper. But he's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get 8 plasma displays. We're going to put them all up on this wall. And then we're going to take all of our system monitors that have front ends to them, and we're going to put them on these displays. And I'm like, okay. The only problem is, why? Because most of these system monitors that we have in place, they run in the back end, and they send out email alerts. So what's the purpose of seeing it up on the wall here? I never got a good answer out of that, which again leads me to believe that we're dealing with another pyramid. And then the funny part was, because we put up these displays, we put the monitors on them, they had so much burn-in that we had to spend extra money for hardware that would actually rotate the displays every 5 minutes. And it would randomly just rotate them. And there was this giant clicking sound when it was doing it. Drove me insane, because I'd hear this every 5 minutes. But anyway, he got his pyramid, but it came back to haunt him. So he's really proud of this thing. And he brings our CIO in. And I actually kind of liked our CIO. I had a couple of private conversations with him about certain things that were going on, and I found him to be more down to earth than a lot of higher end management. So he starts asking some questions about this, and he looks at me. I'm sitting in my cube. He looks at me, he says, well, what do you do if you see an alert on, this monitor that's on the far right hand corner? And I said, well, I bring the monitor up here on my local workstation. He's like, why? He said, well, for one thing, Bill, I can't see it from that far away. I mean, I did sit more towards the front of the room, but I was still a little too far away to see detail on that far end. And I'm like, yeah, I just bring it up here. And I said, I've probably already got an email alert about it anyway, because like that particular monitor sends emails when there is a problem. So Bill's already looking at this like, why did I just spend, over $3,000 for all of this? But then the other funny part was, the way the room was situated, and because of the size of the room, the 2 back cubicles where our second and third shift computer operators sat faced the opposite wall. So their backs were turned to these monitors all the time. So Bill's like, well, what do these guys in the back do? I said, well, they have to bring the monitors up on their local workstations, or they'll get email alerts. I said, yeah, because their backs are turned. Yeah, Mr. Policies was not happy with me. I'm like, well, dude, what do you want me to do? Lie to your CIO? I mean, seriously? I mean, the guy's right. These guys' backs are turned to it. And I said, everything sends out an email. So what was the purpose of this thing? It's just a pyramid. I remember when he left, his boss came in and sat down with me, and He said, you know what we should really do? We should tear these off the wall. And I'm like, I'll tear them off with my bare hands, but the problem is I'm so used to them now, you might as well just leave them. But yeah, another pyramid. Um, the other problem that a lot of us had with this guy was his blatant favoritism, and he was not shy about letting you know about who he really liked and who he really did not like. The funny thing about him was there was no in between. He either liked you or he hated you. So it wasn't like an in between type thing where I don't like him, but I work with him just fine. It was I like him or I don't. And I remember we had a help desk technician that promoted up into our Windows server group. So we had two full-time Windows engineers, and then they promoted this one help desk guy into a Windows support engineer. I don't think he was actually called an engineer though. He definitely did not have the experience for that, but this guy was a complete and total goofball. He would play practical jokes, he did impressions of other employees, he hung out with the maintenance staff all the time. Sometimes you couldn't find him to get any work done out of him. And I'm like, I'm sitting in Mr. Policy's office, and I don't remember how the subject came up, but he's like, I just love this guy. I just love him. Blah, blah, blah. Went on and on. And I'm sitting there thinking, if I did one of the stupid things that this guy does, you would be all over me and you'd have me out of here. So it was like, if he liked you, he liked you. One time, a colleague of mine had a birthday. This is quite a bit later. But one time, a colleague of mine had a birthday. And he sent out a birthday email for him to the whole department. And I'm like, all right, you don't do that for me. You don't do that for most of the people who are here. So it's like, why did you do it for him? It just didn't make any sense to us. Why pick this particular person? Then the worst case of favoritism came when Mr. Policy's got the idea that he was going to replace our help desk / change management software. We really did not have good help desk software, and our change management side of it, for infrastructure changes, software code promotions, that type of thing, it really needed something better. He went out and he picked, I do not remember how he arrived at this decision, but he picked one of the most bizarre and unworldly packages I've ever run into. I don't even know if the company is still around, but it required so much customization for it to even work, especially like on the what we call the development ticket side of things. Drove me up a wall. So you've got the insanity of trying to get the help desk side working, plus getting all of the development and infrastructure changes tickets working was a nightmare. But he put one of the help desk people in charge of this project, or at least major contributor to it. I don't know why he picked that particular guy, but what changed was there was a conference that company was putting on in Las Vegas. And Las Vegas is about 4.5 hours from Phoenix, so Mr. Policies and this software tech who had the nickname of Sir Blabs a lot, mainly because the guy never shut up, he went to Las Vegas with him. They were gone for, I think, approximately 4 days. It was like the latter half of the week type thing. They got back and they were like a married couple. They were joined at the hip. It was to the point where everybody noticed it. Everybody thought it was creepy. But we're like, what? And one of my coworkers even joked. He's like, oh, isn't what happens in Vegas supposed to stay in Vegas? And I said, well, apparently not this time, because something very weird must have happened while they were out there. They came back as buddy-buddy as you can possibly be. And so we get this help desk software in finally. We get the change management software in finally. I don't remember how much time goes by, but we get told of a new position being created called the help desk supervisor. Guess who became our new help desk supervisor? You guessed it, Sir Blabs-a-lot, which really ticked off one of our other help desk technicians who several years prior to this, had gone to Mr. Policies and asked how he could get ahead in the company. We lost that particular help desk technician within a few days. And so then we were stuck with Sir Blabs-a-lot. Now, fortunately, I never worked for him. I did not have to work with him very often. Thank God, because like I said, the guy never shut up. Okay, so we had a lot of favoritism, and there's a lot more incidences related to that I'm not even going to get into. I've got a long list. But here are some of the major incidents. So most of the stuff that I have been talking about has been relatively minor, but there were a few major incidences that got him in hot water with HR. And the first one was our annual reviews. The first few years I was there, annual reviews were fine. Now, me personally, I think annual reviews are a complete and total waste of time. I don't think they serve much of a purpose at all. But we'd have to do them, so we would do them. So what you would do is you'd fill in a form that they would send you electronically. You'd send that back, your manager would get it, he would fill it out, and then you'd schedule a time to sit with them one-on-one and go over it. Like I said, for the first few years, they were okay. He never gave you a good performance or annual review, ever. His goal was, they're not to talk about what you did right. They're to talk about where you're lacking, where you suck, basically. So I never really expected a good review from him. But I think this was year number 3, maybe. We sat down and did the meeting as normal. I signed the paper. He signed the paper. And then what would happen was it would go to HR, they would file everything, and then you would get a printed copy back in a sealed envelope. And we did our meeting, signed everything. I waited for the paper copy to come back from HR. Well, I got the paper envelope, and it was sealed, had my name on it, my department, I knew what it was. But what I did is I just put it in my laptop bag. And I really didn't think about it. But in the back of my mind, something kept telling me that I needed to open that and look at it. Normally what I would do is I would just take it home and I would put it in my one of my paper boxes here and never think about it again. But I kept having this feeling. It's like, you need to open that thing and you need to take a look at it. Something's wrong. So finally I gave in and I opened it up. And on the last page, there was quite a bit of distance between the signatures and the bottom of the page. So there's a lot of blank space. He took and wrote a bunch of handwritten notes in there, disparaging remarks about me. He went on and on and on, and he never talked to me about any of this stuff. So technically, he's added these after I've signed this document. I grabbed the paper. I walked past him because his office was in our area, this, network operations center. And I went into the next building, the front building, and I went up to HR. We had one HR rep that was assigned to handle information services. And I said, "Excuse me," but I said, "I just got this back." And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "I want to point your attention to the last page underneath our signatures." And she said, "Yes." And I said, "None of this was here when I signed this document." And she said, "Huh?" I remember she looked at me and she said, "Huh?" I said, "None of this was here when I signed this document." I said, "All of these handwritten notes he has put in after We had our meeting, and after I signed this, yeah, she was not happy. Not happy. He got into a whirl of bubbles over that, and he was forced to reprint it, and we had to re-sign it. No notes. HR made it very clear to him that if he doesn't talk to us about it in that particular meeting, it does not go on that document. And once that document is signed, that's final. So you better make sure it's the way you want it before you sign it. The same year, I had another colleague too that went to HR about their performance review. Him and I are still good friends to this day. He had been in a BMX motorcycle accident. He used to do racing. And Mr. Policies put that, his poor performance during the year had really impacted, or his poor attendance had really impacted his performance, and he wasn't able to do this type of training and that type of thing. And the guy was like, he went to HR and said, I was in a motorcycle accident. It's not like I just, wasn't showing up to work. So he got in trouble again. I have a sneaking suspicion that we were not the only two, but I can't prove any of that, The next thing that got him into a whirl of bubbles with HR was me in my role in the company specifically. I was hired to be an engineer for a specific system and group of systems, really. And I had the most experience with computer operations. So he said to me, when we hire you, I want you to assist me with training computer operators, monitoring their activities. In other words, you're going to be their supervisor, but not in name. So you're not going to have any title, you're not going to get any extra pay, any of that type of thing. And I'm like, well, I can assist you with it. However, assist him with it meant do it all. And this came to a head when we had a computer operator quit. He was a second shift guy. Him and Mr. Policies did not see eye to eye at all. I'll get more into that later. Then, not that long after that, or maybe even before him quitting, the chronological order here is a little fuzzy for me now, but I had another second shift individual who went out with a very severe medical emergency, and he was going to be out for weeks. So now I've got one guy who's out, who is going to come back to work, but he's going to be out for several weeks, and then I have to replace one other person because they quit. So he basically told me, well, you're just going to have to cover for him. You're the only person who can cover for him. And by the way, you need to hire, you need to find some replacements. So for one particular month, I landed up working about 70 hours a week. When I finally did get a person hired, and I was able to start getting them trained, I had had enough. And the ingratitude that this guy showed me for taking on this extra effort ticked me off to the point that I went to HR. I sent them a nice long email. And by the way, if you are going to interact with HR, I highly recommend that you do it in writing. So I documented everything that was going on, and I sent it to him. And I said, since I got here, I have been doing these supervisor duties, but I don't have any supervisor title. He's put me in charge of hiring these people, so I do the interviews. I hire, he has to do the hiring, but it's my recommendation. Oh, and then the other thing that really ticked me off is that we had a guy who interviewed as the replacement. On the telephone, the guy seemed to be pretty decent. He was younger. He may have been about my age at the time. He was a little bit younger, but he seemed to answer the technical questions correctly, like he knew what he'd be doing. You can tell when somebody has done the job and somebody hasn't. And I'll never forget, we brought him in for a face-to-face interview. And Mr. Policies is sitting in the room with him. The interview seemed to go fine. So I was pretty excited. I'm like, finally, I'll have somebody for this position. And then he gets back into the office from the conference room, and he pulls me in and says, "Nope, he's got a big earring." I'm like, "Excuse me?" He said, if you think that earring that he was wearing was big during the interview, oh, you should see what he's going to come to work in. So we literally did not hire this guy because he was wearing a giant earring. And believe me, I was really happy when I had to tell the recruiter that was helping us find this position. I had to tell that guy that we didn't hire him because of his earring. That was sort of the tipping point for me, where I was like, I've had enough of this. I'm tired of working all these hours. And now I think you're nitpicking the people that we're interviewing to keep me doing it. Well, when I sent this all off to HR, they came back and they were not happy. I remember getting pulled into HR's office and they're like, "What is going on here?" And I'm like, "You guys tell me." I said, I don't mind assisting him do this stuff, but if he wants me to be the supervisor, why don't you guys give me the title and the money? So he got into big trouble with that, and I was no longer allowed to do interviews. He had to do them himself, which is great. I didn't mind doing the training, but no more interviews. And I was also not going to be covering any more shifts. And because of the amount of time that I had worked, HR gave me an extra week of vacation for that year. He was, Mr. Policies was not happy with me. So, and while all this is going on, other people are knocking on HR's door. So, what I'm telling you about is just the tip of the proverbial iceberg here. Okay, I saved the best one for last. This was one I got to throw back into his face. So, we had the 1 second shift computer operator who left. His name was Greg. He was a transplant from Pennsylvania. Very nice guy. I liked him. I liked working with him. My boss, Mr. Policies, hated him. I guess there was some sort of incident that had happened a year or two before I started working there. Something about a Sun Solaris support ticket that we had going on. And for some reason, it just drove him up the wall. Greg ticked him off. And like I said, when this guy did not like you, he absolutely did not like you. And so he hated Greg for whatever reason. So anyway, Greg came in one day, and second shift started approximately 2:30, 3 o'clock. So Greg came in, and what they would do is they would stop by my cubicle, because I sat in the same area they did. So he'd stop by and he'd ask, what type of tickets were coming in. Is there anything on the system monitors? Anything he needs to look out for once everyone goes home, that type of thing. And then we start talking, like coworkers do. You start talking about life, what's going on. Him and I used to talk about pizza joints all the time because he was really, really big into good pizza. And we'd go out and get pizza together from time to time. Well, Mr. Policies overheard this because his office was in our area. So he's overhearing this conversation. So a couple of minutes after Greg goes to his desk, Mr. Policies shows up. And he says, "Well, we really don't have a whole lot of time for personal conversations. We've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of stuff that we need to get done. Blah, 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 blah." And I'm just sitting there like, you've got to be kidding me. Are you serious? This is what you're going to talk to me about today? Now, the only reason he's doing this to me is the guy hates Greg, and he doesn't want me talking to Greg. But I'm like, okay, fine. So I agree with him. There's really nothing that I can do to refute this type of thing. So what am I going to do? So I just agreed with him. He went on his merry way. And then I went into, after Mr. Policies left for the day, I took and went to Greg and said, hey, listen, wait until he's gone, then we'll talk about what we want to talk about, you know. But while he's here, we're going to have to keep it no personal conversations because I don't know what it is, but he's all freaked out, you know. Well, then 2 weeks goes by, about 2 weeks, if I remember correctly, and life handed me a very beautiful gift, something that I could use against him. And I loved this. So I remember I wanted to know what he wanted to do with a specific ticket that came in. And I had my notebook with me. I had the ticket number. I went into his office and I asked him to look at this ticket and what did you want me to do about this? Sometimes it was just easier to go in his office and ask him, what do you want me to do with this? Than it was to try and figure it out myself and get myself into trouble. So he answered my question and I wrote everything down on my notebook. And then before I'm just about to leave, and he stops me and he says, "Oh, hey, would you like to see the house I'm building?" And I just stopped dead in my tracks and I'm like, that was a big mistake. And I said to him, I said, I actually probably wouldn't mind seeing your house, but I can't. He looks at me and he says, well, why not? I said, not 2 weeks ago. I said, you told me that we don't have time for personal conversations. We got a lot of work to do. We have a lot that we need to get done. And I said, I agreed with you 100%. The look on this guy's face was priceless. I wish I could have gotten a picture. Right there when I finished my sentence, just click, because he was just stunned. And I thank you for, dealing with this, but I'm going to go deal with this now. And I turned and walked out of his office. By the way, with a big smile on my face, mind you, because that was one of the best times I was able to throw it right back in his face. Alright, so what was the aftermath from this dude? Well, eventually he did leave. The theory that a couple of us have is that too many people knocked on HR's door about this guy. He drove some people pretty crazy. And I think the theory is that HR probably told him he should probably leave. Like I said, just a theory. We don't have any proof. But one day he just announced that he's out of there. I don't think anybody was too happy or too upset about it except for Sir Blabsalot, his little lackey. However, we got a bonus because after Mr. Policies left, 2 weeks later, Sir Blabsalot went with him. So we kind of got a bonus. And things in our immediate department really did improve. Now, on the whole, the company over the 5 years I was there just got worse and worse and worse. Finally, at the end of it, I was like, I'm out of here. I've had enough. His replacement was a friend of mine. We got along really, really well. And like I said, in the immediate department, things got better. But the company as a whole was awful, and I finally left. Moved across the country on top of it. This guy was definitely the worst guy I worked for, but I will say this, I did learn a lot. I learned mainly that don't let yourself get pushed around by the office bully. There are things that you have to learn to pick your battles here. If it's a work-related item, you probably don't want to battle with them that much, especially when they're a narcissist. Narcissists don't like it when they don't win. So if you pick too many battles with the narcissist, they're going to go bananas and drive you crazy. But when it comes down to personal things like my time outside of the office and maybe working a whole bunch of extra hours per week just because, then you need to push back. You absolutely need to push back. And when you can, make sure that you get specific things in writing, because conversations one-on-one are so easy to deny. So you either have to always maintain the upper hand, or at least make sure that you get things documented, no matter what. And like I said, when it came to going to HR, with the couple of incidents I had with him, I had everything documented, especially my performance review. Oh, that reminds me, I forgot something about my performance review. Um, the next year, so if you remember, I was telling you, you put all these handwritten notes in my performance review. The next year, I learned a little trick from Queen Elizabeth I. You know, her sister Mary imprisoned her in the Tower of London, and she wrote a letter to Mary. And the second page of the letter, she took up about maybe the upper quarter of the page. But then what she did, she put her signature at the bottom, and then she drew diagonal lines in the white space of the letter so that no one could add any incriminating postscript to it. So I kind of got that same idea. So the next year I'm sitting in his office, we're going over the review, everything was fine, we signed it, and then I drew horizontal lines in the white space left on the page. He's like, well, what are you doing? I said, I'm preventing what you did last year. And he just glared at me. He was so mad. Now, he could have written notes on the back of the page, but I was just sort of making a subtle point to him that you're not going to do this again. And I did check that review, and it was blank. He didn't put any handwritten notes, so I just wanted to throw that in. I was pretty proud of myself. But anyway, you've got to keep an eye out for these narcissists, and you have to have the upper hand with them. Like I said, the villain that twiddles his mustache in front of you is very easy to spot. The soft-spoken, subtle narcissist is your biggest enemy ever, because you know they're so approachable, and they're soft, and they're not screaming and yelling, but they're like, well, blah blah, you need to be blah 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 blah. Keep on your toes. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed this little soiree back to my past. I have several of these worst videos planned, so I'm going to just kind of turn this into a little mini-series. And I hope you enjoyed my little rant and rave for today. And other than that, folks, happy coding.